certificate will be offered to all of those participating in more than 40% of the talks. So now we will have an American view being presented by Ronald Sasine. He is in the CBP Chicago chapter.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to be here at such an important conference. So thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I'm talking from Bentonville in Arkansas, which is where Walmart's headquarters are based. Just to give you some idea of what Bentonville is like and the state of Arkansas, Arkansas would be like Mato Grosso do Sul of the US. It's a very rural state. It's dominated by the ag industry. It's very beautiful, very interesting, but far from the large cities you probably know, like New York, Chicago, and LA. So I wanted to talk to you about the goals and objectives of what is happening right now in packaging sustainability in the US. And that's my area of expertise. There are 5 groups that have the most influence on the packaging market. We have the consumer packaged goods companies, retailers, NGOs, governments, and consumers. And I'm going to talk about each one of them. A little bit about the objectives that have been touched on and the goals that are in place. Great. This morning, we had a great presentation delivered by Thais from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation about the project for a new plastics economy. These companies, this is a group of international companies, but also American companies that have made a commitment with reaching a very important goal, which is the use of 100% use of reusable, recyclable, or compostable plastic packaging by 2025. Those commitments are very important. And we're going to talk about how they are trying to achieve that objective. First, what is the motivation of companies to make that kind of commitment? First, it's a personal commitment by the executives. I have had the opportunity to talk to many different executives from these large companies, and I have heard directly from them that they are committed to the environment. They are committed to improving their company's operation with regards to the environment, but it goes beyond that commitment, and it talks to the relevance of that in the current market, because companies that are not committed to the environment in today's market will very quickly find themselves out of the conversation. People won't look for their products because new consumers are already looking to participate and to buy from companies that have an objective and a commitment to life on the planet, that collaborate with the personal goals and objectives of consumers. And the third motivation is future profit, because without relevance in the current market, without the participation of consumers, without taking part in the desires and objectives of these consumers, that would mean putting companies' profits at stake. Companies need to act in a way that shares with their consumers' behaviors and desires with regard to the environment. So what do we see in terms of immediate action? The reduction in grammage. So what we call that light weighting. So using less material, but wrapping products with the same efficiency and productivity and safety in the distribution chain. Many companies are going over the thickness and grammages of their packaging that they use for their products. We also see a great deal of focus on the development of mono-resin multi-layer blown films. So films that can replace the multi-film, multi-cover options we've seen in the past. So there's a focus on developing mono resins, something that we hadn't seen before. We're also seeing an increase in the use of recycled resins in current systems and the use of new technologies to clean, process, and use those resins. And finally, a lot of emphasis on labeling. So communicating to consumers what is already happening to current packaging and how it can be recycled or processed in a more suitable way. So what we see in the long term is the development of new products, which means how these companies are going to change their products so that they can use less packaging and to use packaging differently. So there are two very important trends. The first is the use of concentrates. And we see that a lot in the food industry, in cleaning products, personal care, home care. There's an increase in the use of concentrates in products for textiles, personal care, and dry products as well. Products where we have eliminated the use or significantly reduced the use of water. So we see the introduction of new products that use that system. Also, material replacement, new extrusions that do not require the multi-layer material. We also see the replacement of paper and pulp board in markets that had always used plastics. So this competition is beginning. In the next 5 to 7 years, I think there will be a lot of competition in paper and pulp board for markets that used to use plastic. We also see companies buying new products such as bag-in-box or refillable packaging, as we have heard previously. Retailers, that's the second group whose motivation is very important here, especially, again, there's a commitment by the executives. Executives from major retailers are looking for opportunities to strengthen their relevance and their participation in the environmental movement. So they go straight to environmental packaging, preferably. I have been talking to executives in retail, and they all say that they want to be relevant in the current market with new consumers. And today's consumer is not last decade's consumer or last century's consumer. They are different consumers who prefer and want products that will meet their own personal preferences. Third point, e-commerce. The market, both pre-COVID and post-COVID. So e-commerce product movement systems to meet consumer needs. Everything is being influenced by the online shopping experience, delivery, new delivery services. So different materials are being used, materials that weren't necessarily made for the physical retail, but e-commerce uses a different type of packaging. So the influence of retailers is very important, because at the end of the day, as soon as an idea becomes a reality and exists physically in a store, that affects us all in the supply chain, as well as consumer who will be paying for our work. So as soon as money changes hands from the consumer hands to the retailer's hands, that's very important to our industry. Let's take a look at what's happening in the e-commerce market. In the US, before COVID, we had projected a growth of 35% between 2019 and 2023. I apologize for these arrows. I don't know, they've moved, they're not in the right place, but from 2019 to 2023, a forecast of 35% had been forecast. That was before COVID. Now, what's happened last year? That growth took place in one single year. So what we had thought was going to take 4 years to grow grew in 4 quarters. So we had an increase in e-commerce that was dramatic. It affected everyone. All the material and the products being wrapped and distributed in this innovative and different fashion. What happened in the year 2000 was a huge stress to the existing systems, but it predicted what will happen in the next few years. Now, let's talk a little bit about retailers and how they're organized. Many people think that, okay, so I went to Walmart, made the order, I'm going to sell. what happens with retailers is that there are many groups within an organization that have an influence on the product and the packaging. So usually, as a company and as industrialists, we think about procurement. Okay, you need to buy this product. But unfortunately, retailers work a little differently. The buyer is important, and the buyer at retailers will be judged or assessed based on how that product sells at the counter. The buyer and the seller are the same person with the same responsibility. We have a marketing department, we have operations. What happens to the product within the store or in the e-commerce system? We have the design department, especially with our own brands and national brands that are part of this ecosystem. And we also have sustainability, which is usually directly connected to the company's directors and executives, and that operate have an influence on other areas. So why did I put these 5 areas up here? Because all decisions that are relevant to packaging and plastic use involve all of them. It's not just sustainability that will be deciding and defining on what the buyer is going to do. I have a lot of experience with buyers who have a corporate objective, but it's not really what they want to do. It's not, the category of products that they sell. So there's a negotiation between these 5 groups here. Now, let's talk a little bit about what's happening to governments. Governments in the US, the government in the US is a complex of governments. There's no single government that dictates what's going to happen. It's very similar to what happens in Brazil. You have the federal government, you have the state government, you have municipalities, there are counties, people who affect the final decision of these organizations. So let's talk about this Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. This is a bill of law in the American Congress that was launched March this year and involves the extended producer responsibility, the famous EPR, and was going to create a national recycling system for plastic bottles. So there would be a limit on the use of chemical recycling. And because of that limit, it's being opposed by the petrochemical and the plastics industry. So this bill of law was launched by a group of Congress people with their own environmental objectives, influenced especially by green NGOs, and now the industries are reacting cautiously, but they are really opposing this bill of law. Now, what's happening in terms of local and state reductions? This is where things get complicated because in the US, we have a habit. It's part of, the American Constitution that the duties and responsibilities reserved to the state are very, very important. And so the states exercise those rights with a large degree of independence. Often they don't want to know about what comes from Washington because they want to have their own restrictions. They want to have their own directives for their own state. So there's like a jigsaw puzzle with different restrictions, different laws at all the different states. And within the states, there are other restrictions at the county and at the municipality level. So the structure and it's very easy for a company to see the country as a whole market. So there's a problem. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, and it really disrupts a common single market that the US might otherwise be. So East and West Coast states, Washington, Oregon, California, Maine, New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, they have their own view of what these restrictions should be. At the end of last year, there were new laws passed in the state of California that were very tough for the beverage industry. So now they have new bottle restrictions, new cap restrictions. So that leads to a much more complex market than you can see from the outside. Okay. So what happened in 2020? Many of the regulations were suspended during the COVID pandemic. Some had a break, some were completely interrupted, but soon the government realized that they would have to suspend rules and regulations that were normal during normal times for this abnormal period. As I said, there is a debate among cities, counties, states, and the federal government. And that debate limits the possibility of many companies, packaging manufacturers, consumers, limits a shared vision among the states where they operate or where they sell their products. Like in Brazil, a company in a very large state exporting to a smaller state has to live according to the market regulations of both states. Third point. There are many definitions for single-use plastics. This single-use plastics topic has had a lot of criticism. The packaging industry, the food industry, many people see the single-use plastic packaging as the bad guy, whether it be straws or takeaway boxes or different types of single-use packaging. So a lot of people see the single-use plastics definition as takeaway food. No, no, it's just for delivery items or as utensils that you use at home, plastic forks, plastic spoons, the knives and forks and spoons that come with takeaway food. But a lot of people are already seeing packaging as single-use plastics. They say, no, once you leave the store, you've used that packaging, that's it, it's single use. So that definition isn't clear, and it's causing other kinds of confusion in the cities, counties, and states where they operate. Now, the consumers, this is my main question to you. Will the plastic packaging industry meet the needs of consumers? This is very cute, right? This this is the dog of public pressure. It wants to eat the EPR beef because the plastics industry is feeding the dog that meat. Is that enough, or will people want more? Will people want something different? And what NGOs are proposing is completely different. So consumers have goals and objectives that maybe we don't fully understand. The other thing I'd like to highlight is the influence of the media on consumers. The media in the US has been emphasizing environmental issues in the context of plastic packaging. Last year, there was a documentary, I don't know, some of you may have seen it. Uh, Some of my friends were in that documentary, so I had to watch it, but the wars of plastic or plastic wars. And it was produced by that very famous show called Frontline. Frontline is like a 60-minute it's a TV show that runs an in-depth analysis of different topics. It's a really good documentary. So they look at the history of plastic, the history of the plastic packaging industry, and the end of plastic's life cycle. And it's very interesting. I'm only mentioning that to say to you that this consumer thing, it's not all that clear what consumers want. We know what they don't want. They're continuously telling us that they want less packaging, less plastic, that they prefer products that tell a true story, products that have a solid basis. And as an industry, what we need to do is to get on the same page with regards to these initiatives in the short and the long term. And to do that, we need to understand what consumers are really looking for.
Finally, I leave you with this view of mine. Last year, I was in Mexico providing consultancy for a food company in Mexico. And I saw in a store exactly these three product categories, one next to the other. And what did this tell me? There truly is a packaging that is correct or preferred for each one. In other words, if I am a housewife in Mexico and I'm going to make frijoles or Mexican beans, I have three options. I can buy them in a plastic bag in a larger volume that I will spend 3 hours with a pressure cooker and I will prepare the food myself at home. That's option one. The middle option is the same beans, but already semi prepared. So canned beans that is semi ready. But I can still give my personal touch and I prepare it like my family likes. And in the third option, if I want to buy beans and eat beans that are ready and prepared, just like somebody already prepared for me that I like, it's right here. In other words, the same product, the same purpose to feed a person, a couple, a family. So all of them have the end purpose, the same end purpose, but each one in distinct packaging for distinct areas of society. So this was a great lesson that I learned in a store in Mexico last week. So there is one packaging for each consumer. Thank you very much. And now let's open for questions. Patrice, I can't hear you, Patricia. Now you can hear me, right? Yes, yes, much better. Thank you very much for pointing that out. Uh, Ronald is a consultant, and thank you very much. And now we will open for questions that we received along your presentation. The first one comes from Douglas Dias de Freitas, and he asks, how do you recycle packaging that is already injected together with the label? Excellent question. Well, the in mold labeling topic is very important and complex in the US. We have a case for cleaning products, mainly detergent, liquid detergent. This is a great parcel of the market. What we see mainly with this type of packaging is recycling for other purposes. If we analyze a liquid detergent bottle, normally it is injected with several layers, the co-injection process. So we see that recycled plastic goes to the inner layer of this packaging, and the fresh plastic is being used on the outer portion. So it is being used, but is not being used 100% in a same packaging for the same product. It is being used in a co-extrusion or co-injection because simply we are not able to remove the labeling. So the label is already part of the molded packaging. So we cannot further separate this IML. Ronald, Alessandra Zambaldi asks if you think it is possible or feasible to recycle uh, PVC films for food, that meat tray, since it is very thin, monolayer, and many people do not know that it can be recycled, so it's not being separated. So this is why there is no scale for this. So should we think of chemical recycling for this? Excellent question. The great problem, actually, we have two problems, is to collect this and transportation. To collect PVC films that have been used in meat packaging and other products will require consumers to clean off this material because with blood you cannot recycle it. So it requires behavioral change in consumers within their homes. So this is a fact. Supposing that we can change this behavior and consumers are apt and willing to do this cleaning, we have a very light film, very difficult to handle, and the collection of this film creates several problems. What happens? All recycling systems for plastic have been developed for rigid plastic collection and transportation and processing. So, circular systems that operate and handle and ship plastic based on rotation or based on changing this material or moving this material from one place to another. These systems involve plastic in the axis of the system and will not transport them in a normal fashion. So we need to investigate and innovate in how we collect and process these films in a firmer way. I participated in a study last year of a company investigating taking these films and creating from them building material, etc. But rigid elements and this rigidity allows for their transportation and reuse. The film itself, the great difficulty in it is that we are trying to ship it within systems that were not developed and were not and are not managed for the shipment of flexible material. So this is the key point here. Thank you, Ronald. We have one more minute, and I'm going to try to fit in one more question. Susana de Castro wants to know if there's any law in any U.S. state that requires plastic bags to be used with PCR. Yes. I'm trying to recall which states have this, but what is happening? Normally, this plastic bag topic is being negotiated more with counties and cities rather than states. So, what happens? A state like California, for example, maybe they don't have a statewide guideline, but the counties will. In California, recently, what we have seen is that the the complete removal of plastic bags from stores or bans on plastic bags. So above all, uh, PCR is an advantage, but the great risk for bag producers is not the use of PCR, but rather the removal or elimination of its use overall. So we have already seen this in several states, yes. Excellent, Ronald. First, I would like to thank you for participating and contributing here in the fourth Brazilian Plastic Congress, and we will see each other at 5 p.m. during the debate. Thank you very much.